Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new episode of Stories from Space podcast, where your host, Matthew Williams, examines the history of human spaceflight, the breakthroughs that revolutionized our understanding of the universe and our place in it, and the brave individuals who work tirelessly to advance the frontiers of our understanding. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
The authors acknowledge that this podcast was recorded on the traditional, unceded lands of the Lekwungen peoples.
For me, it's not enough to just travel to Mars and survive. We have to develop a way in which we can sustainably thrive. It's essential that we call on a new generation of thinkers and innovators to make this a reality.
Welcome back to Stories from Space. I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today we are talking to the world's first Marschitect, Vera Mulyani. She is an architect, a landscape and urban designer. She's a filmmaker, and yes, she's the founder of Mars City Design, and currently she is studying for her PhD in epigenetics and microbiomics. Vera Mulyani, welcome on the show.
Hi, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Yes. Well, pleasure to have you there because I'd say of all the people that I've talked to so far as part of the show, all those we've had on, you have got quite possibly the most diverse and impressive background, and one would get the point you're something of a journey woman or a Renaissance woman.
Yeah, I think that title is just because I don't fit anywhere, so they just named me Renaissance woman.
A common saying is a jack of all trades, master of none, but you have actual masters, and I'm not sure that that would apply. I think you've got mastery over several areas. Now, can you tell us the title of Marschitect? This is a very interesting and timely honorific. What exactly does that mean?
For me, it's simply architecture for the Mars environment, because we do have what we call Mars architecture in systems engineering. It's a saying for engineers and mission leaders to plan the big mission, to go to Mars, to land on Mars, and to come back. That's what we call it, Mars architecture. So we want to distinguish for the understanding for people to see that this involves human habitat, human environment, human-centered design, and life support systems that will enable humans to live on Mars, if not thrive. And
that's the key word, isn't it? Not just survive, but thrive.
Correct. And all my hope is that in the realm of Mars architecture, we will eventually include Marschitecture as an essential element if we want to send humans to Mars.
And in fact, the very idea of architecture for Mars, there's a whole lot of significance and implications in there that really you don't see with Earth, right? We're talking, like, on the one hand, a lot of what goes into space architecture, the idea of just living beyond Earth. But on Mars in particular, there's specific challenges, aren't there?
Absolutely. So I guess the initial intent to create architecture for Mars was also the freedom to start with the clean slate, with no regulation that has been set by humans, but by nature directly. And that would be the environment of Mars, the extreme environment of the planet. And that is very exciting to me because it involves everything: science, geology, and also the human aspects. And that particularly will definitely need the team of architects, engineers, and designers, doctors, scientists, and everyone to collaborate. I think just from the introduction that you mentioned, the diversity that I have been exploring in my life is because I don't understand why we have to separate expertise. Well, I do understand because life is so short that one person could only be such an expert on one thing and we focus really deeply. But I guess this is the job of an architect to be able to somehow, it's like a composer. We make sure that all instruments could be included and we can create and compose the beautiful music with complete different instruments.
And yeah, in fact, I mean that is actually I would say for anyone who's looked at your studies, your background there, it does become clear how these various things that people might think are unrelated or whatever, it's like they really do go together. There's art, there's design, there's architecture, there's engineering, there is science, space. Yeah, you have to understand all of this, don't you, if you want to live off-world and create a life off-world?
Yeah, imagine a world that is only built by engineers. Imagine a world that is only built by hairstylists. A world that is only built by chefs or by architects alone.
Yes.
Actually, I have a book for children stories about Mr. Blue, who lives in a village where everyone is an architect. So that was one of the inspirations that really taught me, we need absolute creative collaboration with diverse experts to achieve big goals.
Yeah, and I certainly, I can certainly see the logic there. In fact, right now, when people hear about living on Mars or habitats on Mars, they tend to think of, well, we need structures that can withstand the radiation and have a self-contained atmosphere inside because the air is so thin. And, well, we got to think about the gravity long term, and there's all the logistics of it and how do we build it. And it's like, yeah, these are all very engineering style questions or space flight and aeronautics questions. Growing food is another thing, yes, but what about how are the people going to connect with their environment? How are they going to live inside the habitats in such a way that they don't go crazy because it's just so bland, boring, and they feel isolated, right? Personally, that's what I think is so brilliant about distinguishing between thriving and surviving, right? Surviving means...
Right.
Yeah, surviving means the elements. Thriving means being happy, productive, and sane, right? And healthy. Yeah. Well, for the sake of our listeners, I want to disclose the fact that I have worked with Mars City Design in the past for quite a while, and we'll certainly get to that soon enough. But yeah, right now, I think what the listeners would be most interested in is the road that brought you to this place.
I think it comes back to background education in France, where I had this wonderful mentor who one day for our exam and presentation of our design called the Ideal House, he invited another judge who is actually a doctor psychologist. So all the students were kind of shocked, like, what is she doing here? And it was such a wonderful outcome because the psychologists were basically asking all these mental aspects of how we live inside as the habitat. So it's not just designing something out of, being an artist, creating this magic wand and become an ideal house. It's really tailor-made based on the context, who lives there, and what's their story, and what's the story of the environment, and how do they combine as living moments. And from there, we create the space, and we let them celebrate their lives in there. So that's how the introduction to a different discipline have helped us to go beyond just designing something instead of designing for someone. Mm-hmm. And from there, it made me realize that I have no limit in terms of fields that I can learn and integrate in my architectural practice. And when I finished my thesis, actually, I decided to learn filmmaking because that's the way I communicated my ideas in the easiest way. And after that, it brought me to Los Angeles from New York. And in Los Angeles, I met a lot of space friends who actually really inspired me coming back to my childhood dream to see the night sky and the Mars twinkling when it was such a hard time. And I realized that, this is the time I can actually contribute my discipline to a different world of expertise. And that's when I realized, people are going to Mars one day, maybe not at our generation, but it needs to start integrating architecture now, because it's a long road to start some innovation that will eventually be polished and refined and adopted by the next generation to be able to go beyond what we know today. So that's how our city design was created, is because at the time I couldn't find any position for me to, as an architect, to work in the space industry. Mm-hmm. And that was like 7 to 8 years ago. Now it's different because you could see the impact of what we have been doing is that we're more diverse and people start hiring creatives in the space architecture and also at NASA, SpaceX, all these top space companies. So that's where the journey began.
Yes, and Mars City Design really was and is a trailblazer, isn't it? There's been an explosion in terms of space design and architecture groups, and in fact, well, a lot of these people.
That's right.
A lot of these people actually learn from you. Now, I do want to back things up just a little bit because you mentioned your thesis, and I found out about it, and the name was really quite fun. And yeah, it was F de Rules, basically F-Bomb de Rules was the name of it, was it not?
Yeah, that was a conceptual title. I was in a subway the first day when I arrived in New York ever in my life. Mm-hmm. And it was, I think, an R train that went to Queens, and I heard someone saying, just F the rules. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I kind of adopted it because I wanted to experiment and, how New York was shaped. It's all based on the zoning regulations. Like, you can't really be too creative because there are just so many rules. At least that's what I thought. Mm-hmm. Then it took me 2 years to finish the thesis because I needed to master the rules before we're able to be creative, basically. So that's the lesson I learned from the titles. Basically, you want to be rebel, you have to go beyond the rules, but the only way to do that is to learn through it and master it.
God, yes, that's one of my favorite quotes ever, too. Yes, you have to learn the rules so that you may break the rules. Or,
right.
Yeah, you have to learn the rules before you can break them, and that's Basho. That's attributed to the poet Basho there, yeah. What a wonderful thing. Anyway, so that your thesis was made into a documentary, too, wasn't it? Of the same name?
Yes, it was, again, more artistic, so not like a documentary. Basically, if public would watch that, it needs a context, otherwise I don't think people would understand. It was really specifically to accompany the writing thesis. Mm-hmm. It shows how New York is shaped on a daily basis. I would wake up at the same time in the morning and take one picture every day at the same time, 6:58, Columbus Circle. So basically, I have a meeting with myself every day at 6:58 a.m. to take a picture of this Columbus Circle with a building that is renovating at the time, so we could see the progress and really fast change in New York. And that made into an animation where I could show to the judge for my thesis about, how the change are shaped, and according to the specific rules that I was highlighting in that area, it was beyond what the rule is. It basically renews the rule. It was such an interesting finding. So that was the video documentary about.
In fact, there you talked about how to turn damaged areas into sustainable green zones, and it's a term known as recycling cities. That was also featured in there, yeah. Yeah. And so that same kind of sustainable thinking, right? It's very much related to living in hostile environments or environments that we, are not particularly hospitable to us.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you point that out. I never thought this pattern where, it builds toward what we're doing. Like, I have always been attracted to converting the most forgotten place into something attractive and exciting. And basically, the word may be to revive a place. And that's what we would love to do with Mars. We revive it, but also we want to be part of it. We want to understand it first and think about the human condition today. How can we improve that so that we can improve the land, the planet?
Oh, yeah. And the connection. I believe it was Dr. Cyan Proctor who said this. It's like sooner or later we realize that working with environments here on Earth, working with environments off-world, how unbelievably interrelated it is, and so solving for space solves for Earth, right? If we can...
Right.
Yeah, it's like if we can create buildings on Mars in that inhospitable environment, then we can rehabilitate industrial wastelands here on Earth using the same methods. And now, if I could wind the clock back just one more time. Now, you grew up in Jakarta, and that was, so your young years, your formative years, as I understand it, that coincided with the ongoing violence and civil war, and Jakarta itself, there was violence going on there on a pretty regular basis. But that it was during that time you found inspiration by looking up at the night sky, and also expressing yourself through artwork. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot here or make you feel uncomfortable. But yeah, what was it about Mars especially that was so inspiring?
I think it's hope. Anything that is completely out of the context gives some hope. For me, when we're facing to such harsh reality, there's always a quiet calling that when you focus on the positive, then you could find that. And that's what I was following. It's like a little sign that is appearing during chaos, and that's your, I guess, survival call. And that's what I followed. Yeah. Yeah.
And your artwork when you were young, was it inspired by looking to space as well?
Not at all, actually. Space for me was really, I think it's because we didn't have that access to education in the beyond the science of humans and the food we eat. We don't really have any technological scientific education because the teachers were not either informed, it's a third world country in the past, like back in the early 90s, so very limited information, and we didn't have social media like today. And you guys grew up with space camp. I had my own space camp, but picnicking with my dog on the rooftop with blankets and few snacks, I guess. That's my space camp. So that regardless is very inspiring because when you look at the infinite, distance, I guess, you can understand that life is not just this very surrounding reality. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than any of us, and that's how I understood already. This is why I believe that every one of us is made of stars, and because in each of us have that quiet calling, like I said, to reconnect with the planet.
And if you don't mind my asking, because, all of this really came together and put you on the road that you've mentioned so far, right? Going to France, being educated at École d'Architecture de Nantes, a very prestigious architectural school. That began because people were seeing your art, right? And collectors were buying them, and they were encouraging you to move to Paris to show them and train there. In fact, one thing I've always wondered, where did you learn to speak French?
Well, like everyone else, I guess. In terms of, I went to French school. Mm-hmm. Luckily, we had the French embassy in Jakarta, so I started with that for 3 months. But I did have a remarkable allies that have taught me to write and to speak. A good friend of mine, Jean-Pierre, who have been supporting me since I was really young, and we were helping the oil company in Asia. I was a translator, and I just realized that, when I learned other languages, I actually could read their books, and there are so many new information that I didn't realize existed. Mm-hmm. And so I was finding the gateway to the freedom and the life I have today just through languages and through the books and discovering new people that are from outside where I lived. Mm-hmm. It was fascinating, the discovery. So I forever thank my French friends who gave me, the way to connect with my future at the time.
Well, yeah, like I said, it came together, didn't it? And it proved that everything in life is connected because, from translating and doing your art, you were able to move to Paris, pursue architecture, and then film, and then aerospace because of your love of the stars and love of Mars. And so in terms of aerospace, you moved to California in 2015, and it was the new space industry like Elon Musk and SpaceX and all that had a profound impact.
Yeah, so I didn't move 2015. I already was in LA for a while. I moved there, I think, 2009, and I was able to learn about Elon Musk's plan to arrive on Mars and bring 1 million people by 2100, which is like a lot of people. Oh, yeah. And that's when I realized, wow, that is a city, not a base. And that's when I realized I think I could contribute, and even if there's no position for someone like me with my background, I should be able to create it for myself. And that's how our city design was built.
And so, I was just going to say, you were there for some of the biggest developments, right? This was when SpaceX had been around for almost a decade, but they were really starting to make the big waves. And it's like today, they're a household name, and people are like, oh, SpaceX did this. Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, that's the latest thing they did. But back then it was like SpaceX is breaking ground here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, I couldn't even tell people how excited I was about Elon Musk's plan or SpaceX, because there were a lot of what we call old space versus new space that really didn't believe in his effort and didn't believe in the possibilities that space could be a lot more accessible for the new generations. So I just followed my intuition, and I just think if we are going to send humans to Mars, this is what I need to do. And that's it.
Yes. And so 2016, that's when the Mars City Power Lab was launched, and you guys began hosting the Mars City Design competitions.
Yeah. And that's where all the new Marschitects are coming from, not just, the competitions, but also the individuals that now are leading different programs, like a lot of international design combined with engineering activities, which is great. And I'm really happy that, it becomes almost a continuity of what architecture could do after they graduate as an architect and they learn engineering. They could eventually contribute in the space industry. That was the goal.
Yes, and I will say that some of these designers too, after seeing what they were capable of while covering these competitions, I see what they're still doing now, like their newest designs and their latest ideas, and they are just amazing. And in fact, after Mars City Design began, that's how you and I met, isn't it?
Right.
I was covering one of the competitions. I think it was the 2018 one. Or no, I think it was the 2019 one.
Yes, you were writing about the projects, and was remarkably eloquent that people could understand what each participant would like to express. Now, I think the most significant is to facilitate the communication and the story about the Martian dispatches. This is the next step that I'm really excited to share about. It's important to envision before we do anything, because without the vision, without the imagination, I think people really underestimate ideas and innovations. They confuse innovations with business.
Yes.
Because there is a creativity that is having original value that will eventually create a reality instead of just some object that you design and distribute. This is something that will be alive. So I wanted to highlight that in the Martian dispatches, that whatever we are doing today will determine the life of these people in the future. And what would be their story that we will hear is going to be completely different if we ignore this fact.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to clarify for our listeners, this is, in fact, what Vera Mulyani and myself, what we came together to work on shortly after I was writing about Mars City Design competitions. There will be more information on that. We'll be broadcasting in the not-too-distant future. So you've got a number of projects on the go right now. In particular, you are currently working on a twin study through Mars City Foundation, which is your nonprofit research and innovation arm.
You're right. We're performing the twin study. Mars City Foundation is launching and operating in collaboration with Cornell University School of Medicine, led by Dr. Chris Mason, who also was part of the scientist team studying the NASA twin study previously with Dr. Kelly and Mark Kelly. So this time it's not going to be with the ISS, it's going to be commercial. And we have a few candidates of who we will be collaborating with. And sometime in September, we will have a forum where you could join us. Q&A is going to be on Zoom, and you can register on Eventbrite. Just find Mars City Foundation Twin Study.
And yes, that's on Eventbrite for the listeners. Sounds fascinating, yeah. And this, whereas the other twin study that people are familiar with, that was designed to test the long-term effects of microgravity and space radiation on the astronaut's body. This will be testing health in a more holistic way, which is really quite invaluable information there if we're going to start living in low gravity and different radiation environments away from Earth. Well, Vera, I want to thank you very much for coming on with us. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our time. But I imagine we'll get the chance to speak again because, well, you're not exactly slowing down, are you?
Thank you so much. I hope that this doesn't sound like I'm on Mars already, sound-wise. But I wish you all well, and stay tuned. And big applaud for Matt here. Thank you for your dedication, passion, and helping all of us to arrive to our destination through your help in amplifying the mission. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And I hope someday that, yes, there is a thriving colony on Mars and I can point and say, I had a small, tiny, insignificant role to play with that.
So humble. Thank you. All right.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stories from Space podcast with Matthew Williams. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.